God-centered look at the overall theme of the Bible and our part in it. So, first of all, many times we're not careful. We can put ourselves in the centre of the world, and everything that is happening, we think about how it affects me or how it relates to me. It's as if I'm the centre of the world and all the world is revolving around me. It can be the same with this COVID situation. We think, okay, how is it affecting me? Am I allowed to go out? Am I allowed to meet my friends? Am I going to have to queue for a long time to get my shopping? So we put ourselves in the middle and everything else are revolving around it. And this attitude, if we're not careful, can carry on into how we view the Bible. We pick out the promises that are good for me, the thing that makes me feel good or makes it sound like I'm going to succeed in my life. Or we read it thinking about, how does it apply to me? What is God saying to me? Now, I'm not saying that is wrong. We do need to understand what God is saying to me personally. And if those of you who know me well know that I teach a lot about really trying to understand how the Bible speaks personally to me, how God speaks to me and develops an intimate relationship with me through the Bible. It's a way to connect with a personal God who loves us and wants to speak to us. But it's not the whole big picture of the Bible. If we put ourselves in the centre of the Bible and try and figure out what does it say to me and the people that I know, it's almost like being part of a family, being a son who knows his father really, really well, but doesn't know anything about the family business that he's going to inherit. So if we stop in that kind of a place, we have a very egocentric view of the Bible. Similarly, if we stay in our own corner of the world and we don't look outside it, we can easily lose sight of what's going on in the whole world, and we just look at how the Bible applies to our own country or our own people, and that can be an ethnocentric view of the Bible, and that also can easily be unbalanced. If we put that in a kind of an image, it's like somebody maybe who has a job in a factory peeling potatoes, but is only looking at their own factory. It could be wartime, and the potatoes are meant to be feeding the soldiers who are in training before they leave for the field. But if we don't have an understanding of the big picture, then all we can be thinking about is the potato peeler's not as good as I want it to be, or the potatoes are too small and I've got to be uncomfortable. I'd rather have big round ones, they're too bumpy. Or, why is everybody not having to peel potatoes? Why do I have to do it? And we can start complaining about our own situation if we don't understand the whole big picture. So there's a big difference between starting with myself and seeing how I fit in the Bible and how the Bible applies to me, or starting with the Bible, understanding the big picture of the Bible and finding my place in that. So really vision, so this is a vision, 2020 vision school that we're doing. Vision is being able to see the whole picture and being able to align your personal plans for your life with God's unchangeable purpose for the whole world. If we haven't got the vision, if we haven't got the big picture, we can end up going round and round in circles or just following everybody else, even if they're going off a cliff. So what are your aims for your life? Are you trying to be a better Christian, a better person, a better you? Why? If your aim is just so that you can be happier, you might as well go straight to heaven, because that's where you're going to be totally happy and totally fulfilled. God does want to bless you. He does want to make you happy, but it's for a purpose. It's so that you can take part in his big picture, in his big plan for the whole world. So God has a big picture for the whole world, and he's orchestrating world events for his purpose. I want to give you an example of how God did this in this century, last century, how God did that in respect to his work in Central Asia. Central Asia was under Russian control for centuries and centuries. And the Uzbeks, the Kyrgyz, the Kazakhs, those people groups living in that area, they were often very distrustful of Westerners who reminded them of the colonialism and the oppression that they found sometimes. So any Western missionaries who tried to take the gospel to those people groups, they often found it very tough because people rejected what they thought was a Western religion that they were bringing to them. But God had a plan for the gospel to go to that area of the world, and he actually used Stalin to do it. Now, that might seem quite surprising, but think about the world events that God was orchestrating. Now, Japan invaded Korea, and that was a terrible time for many Koreans. And because of that, many Koreans fled over the border into Russia, the part that borders Korea, to Vladivostok. And after a while, Stalin decided to move the ethnic groups around within the USSR, and he moved the Koreans to 5 different areas. Again, it was a terrible time. Sometimes they were put on trains and sent off to far-reaching places in the USSR, and some of them were dumped off the trains in the snow with their children and just left to survive by whatever means they could find. So if we were just looking at the events as they were, it sounds like they're terrible, horrible things happening. But one of the places that Koreans ended up was Tashkent, and the Koreans that were there worked very, very hard and won the respect of the Uzbeks. And in the 1990s, when that area started opening up for foreigners to visit, a Korean American came and preached the gospel, and people listened to him and trusted him because he looked like these Koreans that they knew and respected, and he didn't look Western. And some of them began to believe, and that was the beginnings of the first Central Asian churches. So that just shows us that God is at work in the world, and he can use even events that look terrible, even God's enemies who are against him and trying to establish non-godly regimes, he can use those to serve his purpose. And what I want to show you through today is that God's big picture that he's orchestrating events for is in the Bible, and it's one single theme. There are lots of things that the Bible talks us to about, but the one thing that is uniting the Bible, it's got a single theme, one purpose running through it all the way from the beginning to the end. And every good book has an introduction and a plot or a body of the story and a conclusion. And the Bible is no different. The Bible has its introduction, which I would say is Genesis 1 to 11, and it has a body of the story, and then it has a conclusion. And I want to look at the introduction together. And within the introduction, we are shown the main characters of the Bible. We're shown God, and God is shown as an eternal king in a spiritual kingdom that is inhabited by spiritual beings that he created, angels and the cherubim. And there's some very interesting videos by Bible Project if you want to look more at the details of these spiritual beings and the spiritual realm. But so the main character is God, and then Satan and his gang. We don't have a very full background explanation, but we can pick up pieces from other parts of the Bible, such as Ezekiel and Revelation, and they seem to show us that Satan was originally a being possibly called Lucifer, who was a kind of a chief among the angels, possibly in charge of worship, who became jealous and rebelled and led a spiritual coup d'etat, taking about a third of the spiritual beings with him, and began organising his own spiritual kingdom in opposition to God. And then we have mankind. It's another race of spirit beings that God created, but this time with bodies. And Satan came in the form of a snake and offered his kingdom instead of God's kingdom to these beings, to mankind. In God's kingdom, Adam and Eve had to submit to God, but Satan promised them independence. He said, you can be like God, i.e. you can be your own gods. And they, unfortunately, mankind chose Satan's kingdom and took all mankind with them. So that leaves God with a problem. And this is the problem that is introduced here in the introduction and that the rest of the Bible is solving. And the problem is twofold. Satan has usurped authority and led a coup d'etat with about a third of the population of heaven. And man has fallen into spiritual death and is outside of the kingdom of God and under Satan's authority. So what God needs to do is to restore creation by reclaiming his total authority in the spiritual kingdom, and then also by buying back or redeeming mankind from the power of the evil kingdom. There's some music going on there. If you've got your microphone unmuted, would you please mute yourself? Okay. So, what was I saying? Yeah. So the problem is having to regain God's authority over the whole of creation and having to redeem mankind back from Satan's kingdom into God's kingdom. And God needs a solution which is hinted at in the introduction. God needs to find a way to solve this problem. And in Genesis 3, verse 15, he hints at this, saying, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. So this is talking about Satan being the one who's going to have his head crushed by Jesus, and Jesus will have his heel struck when he's on the cross. He will temporarily be wounded, but then he will rise again. So, yeah, Jesus, the one who's going to be the solution. So all of the Bible is waiting for Jesus to come and for this problem to be solved through him. And in the very beginning of the New Testament, we have the picture of Jesus being the son of David, the son of Abraham. The son of David was Solomon. Solomon was the king that was had the greatest kingdom. And Jesus is portrayed as that king who is going to win back the kingdom, the whole kingdom for God. He's the lion of authority who's going to restore that spiritual kingdom. He's a ruler in the way that Solomon was. And the son of Abraham was Isaac. Jesus is also the son of Abraham, Isaac. And this is representing the lamb of sacrifice. Abraham took Isaac up a mountain and was going to sacrifice him. And God provided a lamb instead, which shows us Jesus. So Jesus is the lamb of sacrifice, our saviour, who takes away the sin of the world. He's a living sacrifice like Isaac was. So then we come to Genesis 11, the end of the introduction to the Bible. And here we see mankind rebelling against God. He told them to spread out over the whole earth. What did they do? They did the opposite at Babel, gathered together and tried to make a tower that would reach the heavens. He wanted them to lift up his name, but they say they want to make a name for themselves. So God scatters them into different languages and different people groups all over the world. It's represented as 70 nations in the Bible. So he splits them into the 70 nations so that he can reach them piece by piece by piece. He doesn't reject the nations. He wants to have a plan to be able to separate them so that he can reach them. So he has to choose one nation, and through them he will reach out to the other nations. And this begins the body of the story in Genesis 12. So 1 to 11 is the introduction. We've got the plot starting here now in Genesis 12, where God has called Abraham, and he's going to explain how through Abraham he will solve this problem that's been introduced in the introduction. So around about 2000, it's very dark on me, is that you? No, that's better. In about 2000 BC, in a place called Ur of the Chaldeans, which is in Iraq, about 350 kilometers southeast of Baghdad, God called Abraham and told him to go to a new land. the place that I will show you. And God then gives him a very special promise that I would like to split into two parts and show how that promise in its two parts runs through the whole of the rest of the Bible. So he says to Abraham, I will make you into a great nation, and I'll bless you, I'll make your name great, and you'll be a blessing. I'll be blessing those that are on your side and cursing those that are your enemies and against you. I will bless you. So the first part of the promise is God's blessing to Abraham and his family, which became the people group of Israel. And then the second part of the promise, he says, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. I will bless all the other nations of the earth through you and your people. And Martin Luther actually pointed out that in Abraham's lifetime, he personally blessed at least 7 other people groups. So God gave this promise to Abraham, and we know that when God speaks, his word is true. He doesn't need to repeat himself. When he says it, it's true. He keeps his promises. But just to show how important this promise is, God repeats it to Abraham again twice. And I'd like to show you that when God repeats it to Abraham, he repeats both parts of the promise. The blessing personally to Abraham and the fact that Abraham has this responsibility to use that blessing to bless the other nations. So the next time that God speaks to Abraham with this promise is in Genesis 18. And here we can see that God is saying Abraham will become great and powerful. That's God's blessing to him. And then the second part, all nations on earth will be blessed through him. He's mentioning both parts of those. Yeah, God will do and will bring about for Abraham what he has promised to do. And then the third time, again, I will surely bless you. I'll definitely bless you. I'm keeping this promise to bless you. And I'll make your descendants numerous and great. And they will have the cities that I'm promising to them. And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed. We can see that God is continually remembering, yes, I've chosen you to bless you, but don't forget, I've still got all the rest of the nations in mind. I want you and your people to make sure that my blessing reaches out to all of them. So then we go on from Abraham to his son, Isaac. So God not only gives the same promise to Abraham 3 times, but he repeats it again to Isaac, Abraham's son, in Genesis 26. And he says, I'm going to confirm to you the oath that was for your father. It's not stopping with him. I want you to inherit this and keep on going with it. And I'll make your descendants numerous and we'll give them lands. That's God's blessing to them. And again, through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed. Don't forget, you've got my blessing, but you've got the responsibility and the inheritance of taking this blessing to the other nations. And then to Isaac's son Jacob, so this is Abraham's grandson, God gives the promise again in Genesis 28. So again, your descendants will grow, they'll be like dust, you'll go from the west and the east and the north and the south, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. Don't forget, all the other peoples, yes, your people, I will bless you, I'll make you great, I'll watch over you, I won't leave you until I've done what I've promised, not just for you, but for all the nations. So this is going through the 3 generations, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this 2-pronged blessing runs through the Bible. And I will go through more and more of the Bible as we go on with this talk. But I want us to think, when we look at the Bible, do we recognise these 2 parts of the promise, or are we just stopping at the part that blesses ourselves, maybe our nation? Are we remembering that God wants to use us to bless all the other peoples of the earth as well? Are we cutting out bits of the Bible and not keeping hold of them, just taking the bits that we like and not remembering the bits that God really wants us to have? I'm trying to get the light, there we go. So for Psalm 46, verse 10, how many of you know this verse? Be still and know that I am God. Many of us, it's a very good encouragement. Everything's difficult. Don't worry. Just stay still. I'm in control. I will help you. I will bless you. I'll be with you. We know this verse and we pray and we love it. But do you know what comes after? What's the very next bit of this verse? Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted in the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. How often do we just take the first bit and leave out the second bit? Okay, we need, yes, to know that God is in control of our lives, but we also need to be able to bring that promise to others in other nations. What about Psalm 67? There's a wonderful blessing song that's been going around at the moment, and it brings tears to my eyes when I see it sung over many, many nations. There's nothing going on here, many, many nations. And it says something about God being gracious to us, blessing us, causing his face to shine on us. It's beautiful. But do you know what the next verse is? Why? Why does God want to bless us? Why does he want his face to shine upon us? So that your ways may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations. I really wish that was included in one of the verses of that beautiful song. But we must remember, yes, God's blessing is for us. God's blessing is for our people. But he wants us to go forward and to take that blessing to other nations. So let's continue on with the story of the Bible into Exodus. So do we see that God did he just stop with Abraham, Isaac and Jacob? Or did this whole blessing to that nation and using them to bless the other nations, did it continue on through Exodus? What do we remember when we think of the book of Exodus? Think of Moses, the baby in the basket, and being rescued, being brought up in Pharaoh's kingdom, but then being thrown out or running away, coming back to get his people out, the plagues, all these things happening, the people of Israel coming out, the Exodus, coming out of Egypt, God opening up the Red Sea, and then taking them into the wilderness and the promised land, eating the manna. We think of all these things if we read it. But I'd like to show you that we can notice, if we look carefully, that God is, through all of this, he's staying very, very faithful to his solution, which is to bless the people of Israel and through them to make sure that his name and his blessing is going out to the nations. So how does he do this? He tells the nation of Israel that they are meant to be a kingdom of priests to proclaim God's name. What does that mean? A kingdom of priests. Who are they going to be priests for? Each other? No, they're priests for the other nations. They are meant to proclaim God's name and represent God. They're meant to represent his character. They're meant to represent his character as his people. And in Isaiah, we can see that as the prophet is repeating what God's role was for the nations, it's to give praise to the Lord, proclaim his name, and make known among the nations what he's done. So all these things that God has done for you, make known among the nations. Proclaim that his name is the one that is exalted. He's not just doing it for you. He is doing it for you, but not just for you. It's doing it so that his name will be known among all the nations. They have a responsibility and they have a purpose. God raised up Pharaoh and Moses went against him with all those plagues. And in Exodus 9 we can see what it's explaining, that God did this for a purpose. He raised up Pharaoh for a purpose so that he might show his power and that his name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Then he took them out. Sorry, have I skipped one? Yeah, then he took them out of Egypt and through the Red Sea. He parted the waters and they went through. And we often think of that as a picture of how God, even when we're in impossible circumstances, God can open a way for us. And yes, that is true, that is right. But not only did he do it to save his people, but he did it, we can see at the end of this, he was divided the waters before them. This is how you guided your people to make for yourself a glorious name, so that this name would be known. In Psalm 106, describing the same thing. They rebelled by the sea, but yet God saved them for his name's sake, to make his mighty power known. If we think about it, when the Israelites were in Egypt, there were many, many people trading in Egypt, many, many different nations. And when the plagues hit Egypt, many of the foreigners that were trading there would have quickly escaped and gone back home, just like many of us did for COVID situations, quickly gone home. But they would have taken with them the news of what the God of Israel was doing to the gods of Pharaoh. Some people estimate that within 3 months, every resting place on the trading routes, all the way from Europe to India, from China to southern Africa, would have heard the news of what God was doing in Egypt to the gods of Pharaoh. So this is something that, God was spreading the news of him through defeating the gods of Pharaoh through the plagues. And still he had the nations in mind when he was leading the people through the Red Sea. When we see a little bit later that Joshua sent spies into Jericho, Rahab explains why she helped the spies. Her knowledge of the God that made her help the spies came only through traders' stories. There wasn't any temple or any people, any Jews in the city to explain to her. She'd only heard about God through these traders. But because of this revelation of his name through these traders, she obeyed, and she believed and was justified, and was even incorporated into the people of Israel as one of the ancestors of Jesus. So the people of Israel weren't chosen to be spoilt children who were just blessed specially, while the rest of the nations just hung around suffering and waiting until the gospel was going to come later to them. They were meant to be priests and vessels to represent God and proclaim his name to the nations. And God has also made us priests. So I just want you to think about it as we're continuing through this. Are you concerned about how your life is representing God's name? Are you concerned about what the nations will think about God through your life and what you do? Is your life representing his character? So then we've come through the first few books of the Bible, and at the end of Deuteronomy, Moses gets up and speaks to the people of Israel, and he tells them again, before he's about to die, what their role is to be. And he says to them, if you will diligently obey the Lord your God, all the peoples of the earth will see that you're called by the name of the Lord, and the Lord will make you abound. That's another way of blessing, that the Lord will bless you. So again, Moses is telling the people, your purpose is to be blessed by God and let all the peoples of the earth see who God is. And then, as we continue into the next lot of the books of the Bible, the historical books, and we've got about 400 years of various different kings. There's so many ups and downs and ups and downs. The people, some of the kings obey God well, some of them reject and lead the people to follow and serve other gods. And it's a roller coaster of ups and downs and circling back away from God, back to God. But from our perspective, we can take heart that God didn't abandon his people despite their weaknesses. But from God's perspective, we really should be thinking the anguish of a father with a rebellious child who's not only straying from his path and purpose, but destroying himself by doing it. So we've got the various kings that come next. King Saul and King David. Saul started off as anointed by God, but then he didn't please God, and God chose another king, King David, to replace Samuel. And David also did many great things in the name of the Lord. And we have a lot of Psalms of David that talk about wanting the whole earth to know God's name. David wrote many beautiful verses, such as, God blesses us so that the ends of the world, of the earth, may fear him. And God really stirred David's heart to write songs about the peoples and the nations, the ends of the earth. And maybe that's why he was called a man after God's heart, because he had a heart that longed for the lost of the world. And I wonder if we can be described like that too. Do we really long for the ends of the earth to know God? Are we following David in those footsteps? But of course we know that David did sin and wasn't allowed to build the temple for God because of the many things that he did. And David's son Solomon was the next king that came, and he was the king that built the great temple. And at the time of Solomon, people of Israel at that time would say, of course we know that God blesses us to be a blessing to the nations. In the ceremony to dedicate the temple, they'd had a prayer that was saying, let all the peoples know, let your glory go to reach all the peoples. And every time the people of Israel came into the temple, they had to come through the court of the Gentiles. And that was reminding them of the fact that God had a place in his kingdom for the Gentiles. And we hear stories such as the Queen of Sheba, which is now Yemen. She travelled 2,000 kilometres on a camel in order to search out Solomon and hear his wisdom about God, and had many difficult questions to ask her. And apparently Solomon was able to answer all her difficult questions concerning the name of the Lord and his blessing. And she says, it was a true report which I heard in my own land. How blessed are your men, how blessed are your servants. Blessed be the Lord your God. So God was accomplishing his unchangeable purpose of blessing his people to be a blessing for all peoples. And then Solomon fell in love. And he actually married the daughter of a pharaoh of Egypt. And he married a Moabite, and he married an Ammonite, and then he married an Edomite, and a Sidonite, and a Hittite woman, and another Hittite woman, and another. 700 wedding ceremonies and 300 mistresses. So that the probability of this spiritual danger increased with each wife, because they brought with them their own gods. That was one of the reasons that God has said to Israel not to intermarry with the nations, because surely they will turn your heart away after other gods. And this is exactly what happened to Solomon. In not only the name of the Lord was worshipped, but all these other gods were incorporated and even had a place in the life of the people of Israel. So again, Israel went on a downward slide, and Solomon's house was full of foreign wives and gods. And they would have all sent news back to their families and lands saying, our gods are also being worshipped in Israel. The Lord is not the only God. So God's reputation here was being destroyed. And since Bible times, well, I don't think we've had a great record of really representing God well to the nations. The Crusades used the symbol of the cross instead of a symbol of sacrifice and victory over sin. They used it as a battle cry. And even now, in our days, many, many nations see the cross as a symbol of horrific violence and evil and conquering. And, when they see the cross, they don't think of it as something that is God's love to us, but more destruction of their lands and their people. Christian nations, non-Christian nations, look at Christian nations, look at the films that are produced, look at the morality, look at the alcohol and drug use and immorality and materialism, and say, oh, that's what Christians are like. We are so much better, is what they think, in some places, than these immoral and fallen Christian nations. And then we even have people who set themselves up as Christian leaders and don't always act in a way that is really portraying God as who we would like him to be portrayed as. I'm not going to say very much more about that. But, almost 1,000 years even after the crusade, Mahatma Gandhi in India says that he rejects the gospel of Jesus because of the behaviour of people who call themselves Christian. So today's situation is that God's name is at risk every time God's people go after other gods or don't portray God to be who he really is. Every time God's name is blasphemed by what we do and what we worship. So I'd just like to ask you that question. What do you think your life is showing to the nations about God? Or even the people around you, what do they see about God because of your life and your behaviour? So this is part 1. We'll go on further through the rest of the Bible with part 2 next week.
Thank you very much, Julissa.